So we have in this city, there are two iterations of our crime drop. There's the 90s iteration, 93 to, starts around 93, 94, when the city has a huge steep plunge in crime. Basically every major city in this country goes through a similar drop, not necessarily the same magnitude, but crime is declining everywhere in America in the mid-90s for a number of quite fundamental reasons. A shrinking in the size of the late teenage population, decline in the crack trade, there's a bunch of other reasons, right? So we participate and we lead that particular plunge. But the weird thing about New York is everyone else levels off or even creeps up again, and we don't. We keep falling, right? And it's that second drop that's happened over the last 10 years, which has totally thrown criminologists for a loop. Crime is now so low in New York that it's crazy. It makes no sense whatsoever. The numbers are mind-boggling, right? I don't think people in this city appropriately appreciate just what an extraordinary, this is one of the most extraordinary sociological events of the last 100 years.
And let me just ask you, so you don't think most of it has to do with the so-called broken windows theory?
That's a part of it, but what's happened in the last 10 years is now so off the charts and so unbelievably interesting and unprecedented. Some part of it, by the way, is, I don't want to sidetrack this conversation, but in the big debate over stop and frisk that we've been having in the city, at almost no point, it has happened every now and again, at almost no point has anyone ever stood up and said, now wait a minute, there are quite literally tens of thousands of people walking around alive today in New York who would otherwise be dead. Some portion of those people are alive because of programs like stop and frisk. That doesn't make stop and frisk right, it doesn't settle the question of whether, but it ought to be on the table when we have a discussion about stop and frisk, right? Stop and frisk is not an isolated discussion about civil liberties. No, it's a discussion about civil liberties in the context of a whole protocol of law enforcement procedures that have saved tens of thousands of lives, right? On a level that has never happened before in the developed world. I mean, we're talking about epic declines in crime. Anyway, that's a side thing.
And we don't have stop and frisk in other cities.
Not in the same, this is part of a much longer, larger conversation about how the police force in this city is a generation ahead of most big city police forces. So they're doing they're doing both some quite broad measures and also some incredibly subtle and sophisticated measures. Now, this brings me to what you were talking about. One of the many subtle and sophisticated things they've been doing is the thing I was describing in my book, which is this woman, Joanne Jaffe, is in charge of the housing police. So she's in charge of policing all the housing projects in New York City. So really ground zero for a lot of crime, endemic crime. And she goes in and observes really, really high rates of muggings year in, year out, among being done by teenagers, right? And everything has been tried and nothing's worked. And so what she does is she goes in and she devises this two-pronged plan. Prong number one is she ramps up deterrence to a level that, using every trick in the book. So, for example, although she didn't really get into this, and I only jump over in the book, they hack into the Facebook accounts of juvenile delinquents. Of course they do. Because once you're on their Facebook page, you can see who they're hanging out with, right? And they construct these big social maps of...
The cops hack
totally.
into the Facebook accounts.
Of course they do. Of course they do. Why wouldn't
I
they?
approve. I'm just wondering, is that legal?
Well, this is totally parenthetical, but I had this conversation with someone who does social media marketing at a very high level in New York. And I raised this, and she looked at me like I was an idiot and said, you think it's that hard? She would have said, like, everyone's doing it. I don't know why you're so surprised. Anyway. She basically, the first thing she does is she creates a database of any juvenile who has committed a crime, and she starts to follow them real up close and personal. So cops get to know them, and if they they're to the point where if they don't show up at school, they show up, they call their house.
And this is a small list of like 106 kids.
It's longer than that, but you would be surprised in a community like Brownsville or Harlem, the number of kids who are driving the crime epidemic is actually quite small, right? So she does classic police deterrence in that she starts to follow, but she doesn't stop with that. She also realizes that people in those communities don't like the police. And because they don't like the police, the actions taken by the police to reduce crime are viewed as illegitimate. In other words, the families hate them. And she realizes so long as the families of these juvenile delinquents hate me and my police officers, nothing we do is going to work. So she decides, you know what, I'm going to win over the families. And so she embarks on this concerted effort to become friends with the families of every juvenile delinquent on her list. And it's really hard. She starts knocking on the doors and people slam the door in her face. They don't want to see the cop, right? And the breakthrough comes one Thanksgiving when she goes out and buys hundreds of turkeys and shows up on Thanksgiving Day in these overcrowded housing projects where, there's two families in an apartment, knocks on the door, this is her and her, she's the chief, by the way. She does it along with all of her officers, show up at the door with a turkey. And she says, hi, my name is Chief Jaffe. I know you hate me. I know you hate us, but I just want to say, it's Thanksgiving. I care about you and your family. Right? People start crying, hugs. And then they go back. And they go back on Christmas. And they bring toys. And then they start programs for the kids, like all the squishy liberal things you can imagine. And they start a basketball league. And they take the juvenile delinquents, they take them out to sushi dinners and get them, because they've never, eaten sushi. And then they get them jobs. It's this crazy kind of like super, super, super crazy 1968 vintage left liberal Catskills craziness, right? Combined with this super, I'm going to hack into your Facebook page, and if you don't show up for school, I am on your doorstep in 5 minutes, and I have a 24-hour, she has a 24-hour desk. If these kids step out of line once, she's like on it, boom. So it's the velvet, what's it? The velvet glove, whatever it is. The velvet, you know what I'm talking about.
The velvet hammer?
Velvet hammer. And her argument is the first part, the deterrence, does not work until the families believe the law is on their side, right? You start by establishing the legitimacy of what you're doing, and then deterrence works. And that is such a beautiful and neglected notion in not just law enforcement, but in the way countries act in the world.
Yeah.
Right? They think it's the other way around. They think I can hammer you into place and then I'll make friends with you. No. You establish yourself as a respectful party, and then you are permitted to do those actions that restore stability and law and order.
Well, when I was reading that chapter, and then there was another one, but it just struck me that what you're talking about is the practicality of grace. Mm-hmm. In other words, the idea that yes, there's truth and justice, but then there's grace, and the idea that both have to be applied. It can't be one or the other. If it's just squishy liberal policies, you're dead.
Yeah.
But if it's just hammering them with law and order, and when you talk about the situation in Northern Ireland, the same kind of thing with the British Army, when you do that, obviously, it doesn't work. It backfires. But the idea that, I can't ever remember hearing about the two simultaneously. It's always kind of an either or.
It is
stupid argument.
Because think about what's really interesting to me is about what she has to do something to make this program work that is very difficult for not just human beings, but most specifically public officials to do, law enforcement officials to do. That is, she makes this list of all of the juvenile delinquents in Brownsville. That's where she starts. And basically she says, I am going to systematically target in a positive way and do nice things for the criminal element of Brownsville. So the law-abiding kid, at the very beginning, the law-abiding kid, the kid who doesn't, he isn't getting sushi dinners and job offers, right? Now that's really hard to do.
It sounds like the elder son in the prodigal son story. The elder son who's done everything right, he's Mr. Truth and Justice. He's ticked. He doesn't like grace because what about him? He's doing everything right, and this grace is getting on his nerves. It's not fair.
She goes after the prodigal sons, but her argument is ultimately, if I'm going to build a better community in this place, I don't have any choice. I have to kind of bite the bullet, do this thing which is on some level offensive, because it's not fair. Grace, that's the thing about grace in its initial moment, isn't fair. It's not fair to turn to the older son is right? The prodigal son should not be getting the...
He's a bum.
He is a bum. But, you don't get anywhere until you have the kind of courage to take that first step. And now when you go into these neighborhoods, she has had, now this brings the argument full circle. So what happened when she did this? What happened was there was a decline in crime in Brownsville on a level that would blow your mind, that you don't see in those neighborhoods. Like, if you see, when they talk about crime declines in a place like Brownsville, they talk about the graph going like this. What happened when she did her program is the graph went like this. And you talk to cops who've been on the beat for 30 years, and they'll say that doesn't happen.
When did this happen chronologically? 10 years ago, 5 years ago?
She starts the program in the kind of mid-aughts. So she's about in the late aughts. She's about 6 or 7 years in.
So we're calling it the aughts now?
What else do you call it?
No one calls it anything because we haven't decided yet on the term. But I'd like now for the two of us just to agree that it is the aughts. That's A-U-G-H-T-S.
Yeah.
Right? So can we agree now that it's the aughts? So from here on in, we're all going to say, but Dick has to be in. Are you in, Dick?
Halfway.
Oh.
All
right, 2.5, that's good.
How they have those oldie stations that say music from the 70s, the 80s? Well, they'll eventually have to say 90s and the aughts.
They're not going to say, they're not going to say the aughts. And besides, what music is there in that decade? The world will end, before those are oldies. But so this happened fairly recently. So I guess my quick question, I'm sure everybody's thinking it, did we learn from this? Are people using this in other places if it's so dramatic?
Don't know. I never asked her. I mean, it's so new and so specific to New York and so much a function of, Ray Kelly, our outgoing police commissioner, is a pretty remarkable guy. And it's hard to imagine. I mean, here's a person, cop comes into his office and asks for cash to buy turkeys. For the criminals
with our tax money.
Our tax money. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure eventually it will be practiced elsewhere.
Well, I mean, I think this is maybe one of the upsides of writing about it in books like David and Goliath. Wouldn't you say? Yeah.
Hopefully, yeah. Knock on wood.
Right. I don't believe in wood, but that's extraordinary. Well, when you talk about that again, it is grace. I mean, that's all that it is, and it's startling. And there's another example where you talk about the woman, the man whose daughter's murdered, and then at some point there's a woman whose daughter is murdered, and the different ways they deal with that. We don't have too much time, but it's very similar. One of them says, we're going to have the 3 strikes and you're outlaw in California, this crushing thing that says, if you, do this and this and this, that's it, game over, you'll never see the light of day again, and that's going to be effective. And to some extent, it is effective. But you say at some point, there's a boomerang effect, and it begins being ineffective. And then the other woman, maybe you can talk about the woman struggling with forgiveness.
I mean, because the book really, it ends up being about the weapons of the spirit, which is not my phrase, but a phrase I love, which is the idea that so after leading in the book through all these examples of how disadvantages can be advantageous and about how the things that we associate with power are not as powerful as we imagine. Where I want the reader to end up is within an appreciation for soft power, for the weapons of the spirit, the notion that determination and courage and faith and perseverance are actually not just in our imaginations or in our fanciful imagining the equal of material strength. They actually are the equal of material resources. That's the point of the story of David and Goliath. It's the point of the Bible. And it's something I feel like we are given an infinite number of opportunities in our life and in our world to learn this lesson, and we never do. Right? It's the story of everything at the end of the day. And yet we always want to discount those things. We have incredible trouble, even Christians have trouble understanding how powerful their faith makes them. I mean, I end the book with the story of this little town of Huguenots in the mountains of France who take in Jews in the Second World War and basically tell the Nazis they are and say, whatever, do what you have to do, we're not going to stop. And what's interesting to me about that story is that there are lots and lots of committed Christians in France in the Second World War, but only a very, very small number of them take in Jews, right? Only a small number of them realize their faith gives them the strength to confront the Nazis. And that's kind of, there's something heartbreaking about that, right? This sort of lost, in a certain way, it's this lost opportunity because people they had insufficient faith in the power of their own faith. And that's a mistake we all make. We have insufficient faith in the power of these kinds of seemingly intangible things.
I think you said on C-SPAN, I don't know where I caught you, you said that as a result of writing about this, you had returned to some kind of Christian faith. Or actually, it was in Sarah Pulliam Bailey, who's in the room. She wrote an article who mentioned it, but I think you said the same thing on C-SPAN, that writing about these things had moved you personally. I don't know, can you say something about that? Because I was startled that...
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a very religious household and community, but had kind of wandered away. And I think it's because I did not understand that very point that I was just making, that I didn't understand that faith had, I didn't understand that it had that it carried that kind of authority, right? I understood it in the abstract, but but for example, you know, when I was sitting there's a chapter in the book on this woman, you mentioned her, whose daughter is murdered by a sexual predator, essentially, and she and her husband choose to forgive their daughters. They stand up while their daughter's body has just been discovered and she's just been buried, and they stand up and they say, whoever this guy is, he needs our love, which is, to my mind, just about the most extraordinary and courageous thing I have ever heard of anyone ever saying. And she says that because that's a function of her religious faith. And I don't know whether you can listen to that story and be indifferent to faith after that. It's just not, it's not plausible. I mean, the only way you can be indifferent is if you're not listening, right?
I mean, I would disagree. I think that it's easy. Most people would be indifferent to that. They would just shrug at it and walk away. Because I think a lot of times there are things that are logically very compelling, but it doesn't, the logic doesn't break through. I would actually argue that there has to be an element of grace, an element of God's revelation, because facts and logic can only carry you so far. In other words, if it's actually challenging my whole world, you know, I'm maybe not willing to be challenged. So I kind of shrug and forget about it, because there are a number of things like that. I mean, when I was what was that case, maybe 5 years ago in Amish country? These girls were killed.
Oh, yeah.
And the forgiveness there,
Nickel mine.
it was staggering. And I was actually just stunned how the media actually did what I'm talking about. They could not, it is so earth-shattering that these people wanted to live out this forgiveness when, I mean, as a father of a daughter, it's just about unthinkable. They did it. And I thought that this is one of the most moving news stories of our generation, that these people could publicly forgive the murderers of their little girls. I mean, that's news. That's news.
If you think these conversations are valuable, would you do us a favor and please like this video and subscribe to this channel? When you do that, you help us get these conversations out to a wider audience by telling YouTube that people are interested in this. Also, you can go to SocratesInTheCity.com, sign up for our newsletter, and you can check back every week. There's new stuff here every week. Thank you for tuning in.